In this video, we're going to be solving each of the quadratic equations by extracting square roots. And we're going to go over that using some examples to help show us how. So in our first example here, we have 4x squared equals 12. So to extract the square roots, really we're just getting our x by itself. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. That will isolate our x squared. And we'll get x squared equals 3. Then to get rid of our square, we'll do the inverse of squaring, which is taking the square root. So our square root and our square cancel each other out. Now, when you take the square root of a variable expression, like what we just did, you must account for both the positive and the negative solutions. So here we actually will have a plus or minus radical 3. Now you could write this as x equals the square root of 3 and x equals and x equals the negative, see if I can get that to erase, the negative square root of 3. So you could write that either way, but that's the solution. Let's take a look at letter B. Here we have the quantity x minus 3 squared equals 7. So here, the first thing that we're going to need to do is to get rid of the square, because here we see that we have parentheses, right? So we can't do anything with the 3 to get rid of the square. So we'll square root both sides. So our square root and our square will cancel each other out. Now remember that when we take the square root of a variable, we have to account for the positive and the negative solution. So we'll have to solve x minus 3 equals positive square root of 7, and x minus 3 equals the negative square root of 7. So this kind of turns into two problems. So I'll add 3 to both sides here, and I will get x equals 3 plus the square root of 7. I'll add 3 here, and I'll get x equals 3 minus the square root of 7. So we could write it this way, so solutions, or we could write x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 7, because notice they're identical except that this says plus and this says minus. So again, you can write them either way. Just make sure that you're working it out for both the positive and the negative value. So let's do one like that one more time. So here we have the quantity 2x minus 1, so there's a little more happening inside the parentheses, but that quantity is squared and it's going to equal a negative 9, right? A negative 9. So what we're going to do is we are going to square root both sides first. And so our square root is going to undo. And so we're going to have 2x minus 1 equals, now the square root of 9 equals 3. But when we have a negative in there, right, that's going to tell us that we have also an I. So the square root of negative 9 equals 3i. So we're going to have a positive 3i, and we're also going to have to solve it with a negative 3i. Let's move that down just a little bit so we have a little more room. So I'm going to start off by adding 1 to each side, and I'm going to get 2x equals 1 plus 3i. Then I'm going to divide everything by 2, and that's going to give me x equals 1/2 plus 3/2 I. Now you could put 3i over 2 as well, and that would be fine. So now let's solve our second piece. So again, we start by adding 1 to each side, and I'm going to get 2x equals 1 plus 3i. Oh, see right there. You've got to be careful to make sure that you do a positive and a negative one. So this should actually say minus 3i. I'm glad I caught that early before we got all the way done with the problem, because that would be terrible to have to erase it and go back. But we would do it if we needed to. So now we're going to divide everything by 2. And now we have x equals 1/2 minus 3/2 I. So, right, we see our answer here and our answer here. So we could circle those, and those could be our answer. Let's give ourselves a little bit more space here. Let's come over this way a little bit. So I could write my answers as x equals 1/2 plus 3/2 I, and x equals 1/2 minus 3/2 I, or because we notice that they're identical, right, except for the plus sign and the minus sign, that allows us to write it as x equals 1/2 plus or minus 3/2 I. And again, either way is correct and would be right as long as you've got that plus and minus, or as long as you're showing one with a positive and one with a negative in it. And so that is how you solve a quadratic equation, by extracting the square roots.